June 3, 1917. 0540 hours. Northern sector of the Ypres salient, Belgium. A thin mist drifted over the forward trenches and clung to the parapets like a cold veil that refused to lift. The ground was heavy after a night of intermittent rain. Water pooled in uneven depressions, mixed with mud and coated boots in thick layers that slowed every movement. The German lines sat less than 400 meters away. Both sides had spent weeks exchanging artillery fire that shattered the landscape and filled the air with dust, earth, and fragments of steel. The men of the British 47th Division knew that every quiet moment in this sector was temporary because the enemy artillery batteries were precise, disciplined, and quick to adjust fire. Corporal Thomas O'Malley leaned against a reinforced timber support inside the forward trench and tightened the leather strap that crossed his chest. The strap held a dark, curved piece of metal firmly to his torso. It looked crude, uneven, and heavy. To an untrained eye it resembled an oversized kitchen pan hammered into an arc. His platoon had started calling it the iron pan breastplate. They said it looked ridiculous. They said it slowed him down. They said it was pointless weight in an environment where seconds often meant survival. He heard all of it but kept working on his design because he had already seen what fragmentation did to exposed bodies. In this sector, shrapnel caused more casualties than bullets. O'Malley came from a small village near County Clare. Before the war he had been a blacksmith and farrier. His days revolved around repairing machinery, sharpening blades, and shaping heavy iron for farmers. He knew the difference between brittle cast iron, heat-treated steel, and hardened plow plates. He understood how metal absorbed force, how it bent under repeated strain, and how thickness changed its ability to deflect impact. When he joined the army, he immediately noticed how little personal protection infantrymen had against fragmentation. Helmets shielded the head but the torso, shoulders, and abdomen remained exposed. Shrapnel from shells and grenades ripped into the body at unpredictable angles and with irregular force. Light equipment straps and thin uniform layers offered no protection. In April he watched 3 soldiers from his company fall during a German mortar barrage. None were hit by direct explosions. All 3 died from jagged fragments that tore into their chests and necks. The memory stayed with him. The speed, the violence, the sudden collapse of men he had spoken to minutes earlier convinced him that shrapnel, not rifle fire, posed the greatest risk in this sector. Doctrine favored mobility and light loadouts, but he could not understand why no effort existed to protect the torso. He began collecting scrap metal during trench maintenance shifts. The Western Front was filled with discarded fragments of wrecked artillery pieces, broken tools, rusted buckets, and crushed vehicle parts. Most soldiers ignored this debris. O'Malley saw raw material. He found a curved cast iron pan near a supply trench. He examined the thickness with his fingers and tested it against the ground by driving it edge first into mud. The structure felt solid. It was heavy but durable. He took it to the rear, heated it in a small improvised forge built from broken bricks, and began reshaping it. He hammered it into a rounded plate that matched the contours of his chest. The work took hours. Sparks rose with every strike. When he first wore it on patrol, the platoon laughed. They called him the Pan Man. They said he looked like he was preparing for a medieval tournament instead of trench combat. Some warned him that heavy gear slowed reaction time and increased exhaustion during maneuvers. He ignored them. He adjusted the leather straps and secured the edges with pieces of salvaged belt. He tested the weight during a running drill and determined that while the plate made breathing harder during uphill movements, it did not prevent him from operating effectively. The morning of June 3 began with routine tension. Artillery fire echoed intermittently from the distance. German observers tracked movement between trenches. Allied forward observers monitored enemy sappers working on small fortifications. The air smelled of damp earth, oil, and faint cordite residue from the previous night's shelling. O'Malley stood near the trench fire step and studied the cratered no man's land. He saw twisted shapes of old shells scattered in the mud. Many of these fragments had killed men without warning. Second Lieutenant Harding checked his watch and gave instructions for a small forward movement scheduled for later in the morning. The goal was to push scouts 30 meters beyond the current listening post to observe suspected enemy trench improvements. It was a routine task but risky because German machine gun crews in this sector reacted quickly. O'Malley remained silent and adjusted the position of the plate again. Harding noticed the motion and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He had grown accustomed to O'Malley's habit. At 0552 hours a distant whistle signaled a German mortar launch. O'Malley recognized it instantly. Mortar shells approached in a distinct arc and produced a familiar descending whistle before detonation. He shouted a warning. Men lowered themselves behind sandbags, crouched under the parapet, or pressed against trench walls. The first shell exploded 20 meters in front of their trench. Mud, stone, and metal flew upward. The second shell landed closer. Fragmentation ripped across the trench. A jagged piece struck the wooden support near O'Malley's head. Another fragment rebounded off the metal plate covering his chest. The sound was sharp and violent. He felt the impact travel through the plate into his ribs. It forced a grunt from him but did not penetrate. The men around him noticed. Private Lewis stared, wide-eyed, at the piece of metal that fell at O'Malley's feet. It had been traveling at lethal speed. Without the plate it would have torn through his lungs or heart. Before anyone could react, another mortar round exploded behind them. Splinters of iron tore into earth and sandbags. A third piece struck the lower edge of the breastplate and slid downward into mud. The barrage ended as quickly as it began. Silence returned, interrupted only by scattered groans and the settling of debris. O'Malley breathed deeply through the shock. His chest hurt from the force but he remained uninjured. Two soldiers nearby suffered minor wounds from lighter fragments that hit arms and legs. Lewis approached him and touched the plate with 2 fingers. The metal felt warm from the impact. This moment began shifting attitudes within the platoon. The laughter faded because the evidence sat in plain view. The iron pan plate had taken direct hits. If the fragments had struck exposed flesh, the result would have been catastrophic. Even the skeptical men now exchanged quiet glances that acknowledged the value of his improvised protection. The platoon medic, Sergeant Whitmore, arrived to check the men for hidden injuries caused by shock or secondary debris. When he reached O'Malley, he inspected the dented surface of the breastplate and ran a gloved thumb along the metal. The surface showed a clear impact point where a jagged fragment had struck with enough force to leave a deep mark. Whitmore lifted the plate slightly to examine the area. Beneath it, there was bruising across O'Malley's sternum. The skin showed a darkened arc-shaped pattern but there was no penetration. Whitmore looked at the plate again, then at O'Malley and nodded once without speaking. He understood the significance. Fragmentation that struck the torso usually produced fatal internal injuries. Here the damage was superficial. The plate had absorbed the blow. The morning's scheduled patrol was delayed while the officers assessed the trench and made sure no structural damage threatened collapse. During the pause, several soldiers gathered around O'Malley to inspect the plate more closely. They studied the dents and the rough curvature he had hammered into the iron. One soldier asked him how he managed to shape metal this thick without a proper anvil. Another asked whether cast iron cracked easily under repeated strikes. O'Malley answered each question with careful explanations. He described the thickness required to deflect shrapnel, the advantages of curved surfaces for redirecting force, and the importance of distributing weight across the chest so the straps did not cut into the shoulders. Harding eventually ordered the men to disperse and prepare for the delayed forward scout movement. The laughter from earlier weeks did not return. The plate had proven itself during a live barrage. The soldiers now regarded it with serious interest. Some already wondered if they could replicate the design. The patrol moved at 0730 hours. The goal remained unchanged. They needed to extend observation closer to a recently fortified German trench lip. The enemy had added wooden stakes, new firing slits, and what looked like a small forward sap. Intelligence wanted confirmation of how deep the new construction ran. O'Malley walked with the second group, carrying his Lee Enfield rifle and the iron plate secured tightly against his uniform. The weight slowed his breathing but he remained steady. They advanced through a communication trench. The mud forced them to step around narrow ditches filled with stagnant water. The air felt heavy. Far off, the sound of artillery drifted across the sector. When they reached the forward listening post, they waited for the scouts from the first group to return. 10 minutes passed. No movement. Harding signaled for O'Malley's group to advance another 10 meters beyond the listening post to a shallow fold of ground that offered partial cover. A small ridge created a natural depression. O'Malley crawled forward with 2 others and raised his periscope. The new German sap extended farther than expected. The enemy had reinforced it with heavy planks and appeared to be preparing a position that could support either a forward machine gun or an observation post. The structure's angle suggested it would give German spotters an improved line of sight across the British trench system. That made it dangerous. If completed, the new sap could call in artillery with extreme accuracy. Harding whispered instructions. The scouts would pull back and report the findings. O'Malley kept his eyes on the distance. He saw faint movement near the German position. Someone shifted behind the new construction. The figure bent low and disappeared behind a plank. O'Malley lowered the periscope and signaled the presence of enemy activity. The withdrawal began quietly. They moved one at a time, crawling through the mud to avoid exposing themselves. Halfway through the pullback, a German observer must have detected movement. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Moments later, a burst of machine gun fire shredded the top of the listening post. The rounds kicked up dirt and splintered wooden edges. O'Malley pressed his chest against the mud and waited for the firing to pause. Harding signaled them to continue withdrawing. The group moved in short bursts between shallow depressions. German riflemen began firing from multiple angles. Every movement risked exposure. When they reached a narrow trench cutout, they halted briefly to reassess distance and angles. O'Malley crouched against the trench wall. He felt the weight of the plate shifting as he adjusted his breathing. The metal still held the warmth of earlier impacts. He tightened the left strap again. Lewis whispered that the Germans were adjusting fire downward, trying to track the angle of movement. O'Malley did not respond. He focused on the rhythm of the enemy bursts. Machine gun crews often fired in controlled patterns. He counted seconds between volleys. At the next pause, they sprinted toward the communication trench. Mud flew beneath their boots. German rifle fire followed them, kicking up small bursts of dirt. One round struck a wooden plank near O'Malley's shoulder and ricocheted. Another round aimed low and hit the ground in front of him. When they reached the trench opening, they threw themselves inside and gasped from the sudden drop in exertion. The danger did not end there. German mortar crews had heard the rifle fire and prepared a rapid bombardment to hit any retreating patrol. The first mortar round landed behind them, closer than expected. The second round detonated in front of the trench opening, scattering fragments across a wide arc. Lewis ducked behind a sandbag wall. O'Malley remained low, covering his head with his arms. A fragment struck his breastplate again. This impact was lighter, but it produced the same sharp metallic thud. Another piece struck the plate's right side and slid off. Harding checked the men. No one suffered serious injuries. O'Malley felt another bruise forming under the plate, but nothing worse. The retreat succeeded. They had gathered the necessary intelligence and avoided fatal casualties. The officers noted the plate's repeated performance. Harding did not mention it aloud, but his glance at the dented metal indicated clear recognition. As they returned to the main trench, talk about the plate increased. A few soldiers asked O'Malley whether he could create additional plates if they found enough scrap metal. Others wondered if a lighter design might offer similar protection. O'Malley listened carefully. He told them which types of metal worked best. Thick cast iron absorbed impact but weighed more. Hardened steel deflected better and weighed less but was harder to shape with improvised tools. Curved plates performed better than flat ones. Angled edges helped direct force away from the torso. Later that afternoon, the company sergeant major inspected the front line. When he reached O'Malley, he stopped. He studied the plate without expression. The Army rarely endorsed unofficial modifications to standard gear. Additional weight risked slowing movements during assaults. But ignoring a device that had already stopped fragmentation twice in one day felt irresponsible. After a long pause, the sergeant major told O'Malley to report to the rear workshop that evening. He wanted a full explanation of the design. The rear workshop sat inside a reinforced dugout built behind a thick earthen berm. The space had originally served as a storage room for damaged entrenching tools and discarded parts of field equipment. Now it functioned as an improvised repair station for anything the frontline companies brought back. Lanterns hung from wooden beams overhead, giving the room a dim yellow glow. The air smelled of oil, soot, and damp cloth. Metal scraps lay in piles along one wall. A small forge, assembled from stacked bricks and a salvaged bellows, occupied corner. When O'Malley arrived in the evening, he found the sergeant major waiting with a lieutenant from the engineering section. The lieutenant had a clipboard and a calm, analytical demeanor. He asked O'Malley to remove the breastplate and place it on a wooden table. The metal clanged when it hit the surface. Its dents and scratches were visible in the lantern light. The lieutenant ran his fingers over the impact points and examined the curvature. He asked detailed questions. He wanted to know the original shape of the scrap metal, the temperature used during heating, the number of hammer strikes required to achieve the arc, and the exact thickness across the central plane. O'Malley explained each step. He described how he had heated the plate to a faint red color before shaping it. He explained why he chose a rounded form rather than a flat one. A curved surface spread force across a larger area and increased the chance that a fragment would deflect rather than penetrate. The lieutenant nodded at each answer and took notes. He acknowledged that while the design was crude, the principle made sense. Fragmentation traveled irregularly and lost energy quickly when striking angled surfaces. Light equipment did nothing to stop it. A thick plate, even a simple one, could prevent lethal penetration at common engagement distances. The challenge was weight. Soldiers already carried rifles, ammunition, bayonets, canteens, gas masks, and entrenching tools. Adding several kilograms of iron could alter maneuverability. The sergeant major asked O'Malley whether the plate limited his ability to run or flank during movement under fire. O'Malley answered honestly. The added weight made uphill movements harder, but it never prevented him from operating effectively. He pointed out that in trenches, most casualties came from artillery and grenades, not from situations requiring long sprints. Protection, he argued, outweighed the drawback. The lieutenant listened. After a moment he said that while they could not officially authorize the use of improvised body armor, they would not forbid it either. The Army's doctrine emphasized mobility, but frontline realities often forced adaptations. If soldiers could produce their own protective equipment without disrupting supply lines, the command structure would tolerate it informally. He then asked O'Malley whether he could teach others to shape similar plates. O'Malley agreed. His skill as a blacksmith made the process manageable. If he had enough scrap metal and time, he could produce simple chest plates for several men. The lieutenant approved the request and assigned a small section of the workshop to him. That night O'Malley began sorting through scrap piles. He selected pieces of cast iron, steel plating from damaged carts, and thick machinery panels. He tested each piece by tapping it with his hammer and listening to the sound. Thick, dense metals emitted a lower tone. Thin pieces vibrated too easily. By morning he had collected enough material to begin work. Word spread quickly through the company. Soldiers visited the workshop in groups, asking questions about the design. Some wanted full plates. Others asked whether smaller plates could protect the abdomen. A few considered adding plates to their backs. O'Malley explained the limitations. A full suit of improvised armor would be too heavy. But a breastplate and small backplate offered a reasonable balance between protection and mobility. The first new plate took hours. He heated the scrap iron until it turned a dull red, then hammered it on the flat metal table. Sparks rose with each strike. The noise echoed in the workshop. The metal resisted at first. Cast iron was harder to shape without cracking. O'Malley worked patiently. He avoided hitting the same spot repeatedly to prevent brittle fractures. When he finished the rough shaping, he quenched the plate in a bucket of water. Steam rose from the surface. The curve matched the contours of a human chest with only minor adjustments needed. When he showed the finished piece to the waiting soldiers, they examined it closely. The weight surprised them. It felt heavier than it looked. But when they considered what it could stop, the weight seemed less important. O'Malley distributed the plate to a soldier who volunteered to test it during the next patrol. The man strapped it on and adjusted his webbing. It fit more comfortably than he expected. During the next week the front remained active. German artillery targeted the sector frequently. Mortar rounds fell unpredictably. Machine gun fire swept across open sections whenever patrols moved forward. 2 soldiers wearing O'Malley's plates returned from a patrol with visible scarring on the metal. A fragment had struck one plate near the upper left quadrant. The dent was deep. Without the armor the fragment would have carved through ribs and shoulder tissue. The soldier, shaken by the near miss, thanked O'Malley directly. Another soldier reported that a grenade thrown during a brief skirmish detonated behind him. He instinctively turned his body to shield his face. A large fragment struck the backplate he had secured with leather straps. The impact knocked him forward. He suffered bruising along the spine but survived. That story spread through the company. Men who once laughed at the concept now requested plates as quickly as O'Malley could produce them. The officers watched these developments with cautious interest. Improvised solutions carried risk. Anything that deviated from standard equipment had to be used responsibly. But they could not ignore the evidence. Fragmentation casualties in the company declined during the period when several soldiers wore plates. The reduction was small but measurable. As more plates appeared in the front lines, neighboring units noticed. A few soldiers from adjacent trenches visited O'Malley's workshop. They observed his process and asked whether they could trade spare tools or ration tins for a plate. O'Malley refused payment. He said the work was not a trade but a necessity. The more men who survived fragmentation, the stronger their line became. The engineering lieutenant returned after several days to examine the new plates. He noted the consistency in curvature, the quality of shaping, and the performance during engagements. He recorded fragment penetration results and measured impact depths. He then asked O'Malley whether he believed a thinner steel plate, curved and hardened, could offer similar protection with less weight. O'Malley considered the question. Hardened steel required higher temperatures and more controlled treatment than they could produce with the workshop's improvised forge. Cast iron, while heavier, was more accessible. In their current conditions, cast iron remained the practical choice. The lieutenant understood. He said that even crude innovations mattered when the enemy's primary weapon was fragmentation. He suggested continuing the work and collecting more evidence of performance. If data became strong enough, the higher command might consider official prototypes. During this period, the battlefield intensified. German units increased pressure along the sector. Artillery bombardments grew heavier. Patrols encountered more aggressive resistance. The trenches shook during night shelling. Men slept lightly and woke to the sound of explosions. Fragmentation cut through sandbags and wooden beams daily. In this environment, the plates became more than protective tools. They became symbols of control in a battlefield where soldiers often felt helpless against artillery. Wearing a plate did not guarantee survival, but it improved chances. That small improvement mattered. By late June, the presence of improvised breastplates in the 47th Division had become impossible to ignore. Officers noted them during trench inspections. Quartermasters saw them during ration distribution. Even stretcher teams reported that wounded soldiers who wore plates often survived upper torso fragmentation that would have killed them outright weeks earlier. No one issued official approval. No one issued a ban. The silence indicated a quiet acceptance shaped by necessity rather than doctrine. O'Malley continued working in the rear workshop every night. His hands grew stiff from hammering. His forearms ached from lifting heated iron. He worked with deliberate rhythm. Heat, shape, quench, adjust. The process repeated until the curve matched the human torso. Each plate carried subtle differences based on its original scrap source. Some plates came from broken vehicle axles. Others came from crushed farm tools. The battlefield produced an endless supply of metal. The soldiers who wore the plates grew protective of them. They cleaned the surfaces, replaced worn straps, and checked the edges for cracks. A few men painted small marks near impact dents to indicate hits survived. By the end of June, a handful of plates displayed multiple marks. Each mark represented a fragment that could have entered the chest cavity. O'Malley himself wore his original plate on every patrol. The dents on it deepened and multiplied. The iron surface looked rougher with each engagement. He understood that the plate had a limit. Repeated impacts weakened structural integrity. He considered reforging it, but the plate had become a part of his identity within the company. He preferred to keep it until it failed naturally. That failure would show him how much force the design could truly withstand. The sector entered a period of intensified shelling. German artillery targeted the communication trenches at unpredictable intervals. The enemy attempted to disrupt supply lines, ammunition transfers, and reinforcement routes. Bombardments lasted 10 minutes, then 30, then an hour. After each barrage, the ground shifted slightly. Trenches buckled. Sandbags collapsed. Wood supports cracked. During one of these bombardments, O'Malley crouched inside the forward trench beside Private Lewis. The earth trembled from the force of the shells. Explosions erupted in rapid sequence. Fragmentation hissed through the air. A shell detonated near the trench corner. A fragment struck Lewis's left shoulder. The impact knocked him sideways, but the wound was shallow. Another fragment struck the upper portion of O'Malley's breastplate. The metal rang sharply. The force pushed him backward into the trench wall, but the plate held. When the bombardment ended, the trench filled with dust and the choking smell of pulverized earth. Men crawled out from cover and checked for wounded. Several soldiers suffered leg and arm wounds. One man near the communication trench lost consciousness from a blast concussion. The medic treated the worst injuries first. O'Malley moved to help stabilize damaged wooden braces. As he worked, more men asked whether he had materials left to craft additional plates. He told them what remained and explained that heavier scrap was running low. They needed new sources. Later that afternoon, scouts discovered a destroyed British supply wagon half submerged in mud near a collapsed trench section. Its metal frame was twisted but intact enough to salvage. When O'Malley inspected it, he found several thick steel panels that could serve as plate material. The discovery extended his production capability for weeks. That night he began shaping steel panels for a new batch of plates. Steel required more precision. It heated at a different rate and cooled faster. Shaping it while maintaining internal strength was difficult. The workshop's forge reached adequate temperature only when fed with a mix of dry wood and powdered charcoal. He worked until early morning. Sweat collected on his forehead. Sparks flew with each hammer strike. When he finished the first steel plate, he held it up to the lantern light and examined its curvature. It was cleaner, thinner, and stronger than any cast iron plate he had made. The next day he delivered the new steel plate to Harding for inspection. Harding lifted it, tested the weight, and acknowledged that it was lighter than the iron version. He asked O'Malley whether steel plates offered equal protection. O'Malley explained that the curvature mattered more than raw thickness. A curved surface increased resistance by redirecting force. Steel, when properly shaped, deflected fragmentation more effectively. Harding approved its use. Days later, a patrol wearing one of the new steel plates encountered a German ambush near an abandoned forward sap. Grenades exploded around the men. 2 soldiers fell with leg wounds. One grenade detonated almost directly in front of a soldier named Carter. He raised his arms instinctively. The blast sent fragments toward his torso. Several fragments struck his steel breastplate. The plate stopped all of them. Carter suffered bruising but no penetration. When he returned to the trench, the men crowded around him to see the impact marks. The plate had done its job. Carter's account spread quickly. Soldiers from other companies approached O'Malley's workshop. They asked for steel plates even if it meant waiting days. O'Malley prioritized his own company first, then helped others when he could. He taught several men to assist with heating and hammering. Under his supervision they produced usable plates at acceptable quality. He corrected the angle of a curve here or the thickness of an edge there. Over time the team became efficient. In the second week of July the sector received intelligence that German forces planned a probing assault. The frontline companies prepared for heavy engagement. They reinforced parapets, stacked additional sandbags and secured ammunition stores. Night patrols increased. The command believed the assault would begin soon. On the night of July 10 the enemy launched an artillery barrage followed by a coordinated infantry advance. The sky lit with flashes. The sound rolled across the trenches like continuous thunder. O'Malley stood on the fire step, gripping his rifle. The breastplate pressed firmly against his chest. He could feel his pulse through the metal. The enemy barrage targeted the front trenches with high explosive rounds. Fragmentation filled the air. As the barrage lifted, German infantry emerged from the darkness. Their silhouettes appeared in broken lines as they advanced across cratered ground. Machine gun crews opened fire from the British side. Riflemen took positions along the parapet. The German assault force pushed forward, throwing grenades into blind corners and narrow trench gaps. One grenade landed near a group of British soldiers. It rolled toward them before exploding. The blast filled the space with fragments. 2 soldiers wearing plates survived with minor injuries. A third soldier without a plate suffered a deep chest wound. O'Malley moved with Harding to reinforce a threatened trench junction. Enemy troops attempted to breach the line. Gunfire erupted at close range. A German soldier threw a grenade directly into the narrow section. O'Malley turned instinctively and the grenade detonated behind him. The backplate he wore absorbed multiple fragments. The blast knocked him forward. He hit the ground hard but remained conscious. Harding dragged him behind cover as the assault continued. The plates saved his life a second time that night. The German assault continued for nearly 40 minutes. The attackers pushed into a shallow section of the trench, forcing brutal close-range fighting. Bayonets clashed. Rifle shots echoed inside narrow walls. Men grappled in mud that reached their ankles. Fragmentation blasts tore through the air whenever a grenade fell into confined space. The defenders held the line with steady pressure, anchoring their position with machine gun support from the right flank. O'Malley regained his balance and rose to his knees. His backplate had taken the brunt of the explosion. The impact left his ribs throbbing. Breathing felt tight, but he remained functional. Harding checked him briefly, then moved forward to direct fire toward a breach where German troops attempted to climb over a shattered sandbag wall. O'Malley followed, stepping over broken planks and shell fragments. A German soldier lunged at the trench lip with a stick grenade in hand. O'Malley fired once. The man fell backward into the cratered ground. Another figure appeared behind him. Machine gun fire from deeper inside the trench forced the second attacker to take cover. The defenders used that moment to re-establish their firing line. Gunfire, shouts, and metal clashing filled the trench. The enemy assault eventually weakened. The attackers began pulling back after sustaining heavy losses. The British line held. When the fighting ended, the trench smelled of cordite, smoke, and blood. The ground was littered with fragments, spent casings, and broken equipment. Several wounded men leaned against trench walls while medics moved among them. O'Malley removed his backplate to check the damage. The surface bore 3 deep impact marks where fragments had struck with force that would have torn through flesh. The metal showed slight cracking along one edge. The plate was nearing its limit. He placed it on the ground and exhaled slowly. The men around him understood what the plate meant. They saw it was no longer a strange joke but a functional defense that had saved lives repeatedly. At dawn the officers conducted a full inspection. They assessed structural damage, ammunition expenditure, and casualty reports. When they reached O'Malley, Harding asked whether he could reinforce the backplate. O'Malley shook his head. The metal had absorbed too many impacts. Reheating risked further weakening it. Harding nodded and told him they would search for heavier steel so he could produce a new backplate. During the following days the front remained active, but the German assault had stalled. British intelligence believed the enemy had tested the sector's resilience. The defenders' response had been effective. The officers credited several factors for the line's stability. One factor was the reduction in fragmentation casualties among men wearing plates. Wounds were still common. Deaths were fewer. The survival rate changed morale. Soldiers who once viewed fragmentation as an unavoidable threat now felt they had a fighting chance. This shift affected behavior. Men who once crawled into cover at every distant explosion now held their positions longer. They moved with more confidence during patrols. They no longer saw grenades as unstoppable threats. They still respected them, but fear no longer governed their actions. Discipline improved. Coordination between fire teams became tighter. News of the plates reached the divisional staff. Although the higher command remained cautious, they requested a report summarizing the design, performance, and survival cases attributed to the plates. Harding and the engineering lieutenant worked together to compile the data. They documented the number of plates used, the frequency of impacts, the depth of dents, and the number of soldiers saved from penetrating wounds. The report noted that improvised breastplates were not an official part of standard kit but demonstrated valuable potential in high fragmentation environments. O'Malley continued refining his process. He shaped steel plates with more uniform curvature. He experimented with edge thickness. He found that adding a small outward flare at the bottom of the plate helped redirect downward traveling fragments. He also added leather padding behind some plates to reduce bruising. Soldiers who wore these improved designs reported less discomfort and fewer rib injuries after impacts. The company officers discussed the possibility of distributing plates across the entire platoon. But production remained limited by available metal and time. O'Malley trained 2 additional men in heating and shaping. Together they increased output. They operated the workshop in shifts, alternating between frontline duties and fabrication. Even with assistance, the process remained slow. Creating a single steel plate required hours of labor. Perfection demanded patience, and O'Malley refused to compromise. In mid-July a new threat emerged. German trench mortars, smaller and more portable than standard artillery, increased activity along the sector. These mortars fired small, finned explosive rounds that produced high-velocity fragments. The rounds had shorter range but were easier to conceal and deploy. They allowed German crews to target narrow trench angles where defenders felt safest. During one afternoon barrage a mortar round struck a trench support beam and detonated 2 meters away from O'Malley. The blast sent fragments in all directions. A piece the size of a thumb struck the lower edge of his breastplate. The metal dented again but did not break. Another fragment grazed his right arm, leaving a shallow cut. 2 soldiers behind him suffered minor wounds but no one died. The plate had protected the critical zone. After the barrage ended, the engineering lieutenant returned to the trench to inspect the impact. He studied the dent closely. The force of the fragment was strong enough to tear through unprotected flesh and fracture ribs. The plate's performance confirmed its value against both conventional artillery and light trench mortars. He updated the report with this new evidence. The next day a messenger arrived at the workshop carrying a letter from divisional headquarters. The letter requested a demonstration of the plates. The staff wanted to see the process firsthand and evaluate whether the design could influence future development of official protective gear. The request surprised O'Malley. He had not expected formal attention. But he agreed. The demonstration took place in a sheltered testing area behind the front line. Officers from several units attended. O'Malley presented a steel plate with moderate curvature. He described its shaping method, metal source, and intended purpose. Then he positioned the plate against a sandbag stack. A controlled detonation was prepared using a captured German stick grenade. The grenade exploded. Fragmentation peppered the sandbags and struck the plate. When the smoke cleared, the officers inspected the damage. Several fragments had left visible dents. None had penetrated. The demonstration convinced them that Improvised solutions could hold tactical value. Although the officers did not issue any official orders, they acknowledged that the plates reduced casualty severity. They encouraged units to permit continued experimentation. They also asked the engineering section to examine ways to replicate the design using more standardized methods when possible. By late July, the plates had become a defining feature of the company. Soldiers viewed them the same way they viewed helmets. Protection mattered. Experience had shown that survival often depended on preparation rather than chance. O'Malley's innovation gave the men an advantage. Yet O'Malley himself remained realistic. He knew the plates were not perfect. They could not stop rifle rounds. They could not protect limbs. They could not prevent concussive injuries. But they provided vital protection where it mattered most, and that single improvement saved lives repeatedly. The men trusted him. They trusted his judgment, his craftsmanship, and his willingness to spend hours shaping metal that might keep them alive. The final weeks of July brought a mix of exhaustion and hardened resolve. The company had endured relentless artillery, night raids, and the grinding weight of trench existence. Yet the men carried themselves with a noticeable change. They no longer entered each barrage believing fate alone decided survival. They believed in preparation. They believed in skill. And many believed in the iron and steel plates forged in the dim yellow light of O'Malley's workshop. The enemy noticed this resilience. German patrols reported that British frontline troops in this sector appeared harder to suppress with fragmentation fire. Mortar teams increased their targeting, attempting to break the defenders' confidence. But even during intense bombardments, casualties remained lower than predicted. Small pieces of jagged steel that once tore through the chest instead struck curved plates and fell to the mud with harmless metallic taps. The men guarded their plates with care. No one treated them as curiosities anymore. Soldiers repaired straps, reinforced edges with spare leather, and checked dents each morning. When a patrol prepared to move, the presence of plates offered reassurance. The sound of metal shifting under webbing became a familiar noise. The command noted this morale shift. It showed in the soldiers' posture, their confidence under fire, and the tightness of their drill. Doctrine had demanded mobility above protection, but in this environment mobility meant little if a grenade blast ended a man's life instantly. The plates balanced the equation. As July neared its end, O'Malley produced the last plate from the salvage gathered earlier in the month. His hands were raw. His palms bore calloused ridges. His hearing rang from long nights near the forge. The engineering lieutenant visited him again to document final production numbers. In total, more than 24 plates had been manufactured. Many had sustained impacts. A significant number had saved lives. The data now formed a clear pattern. The lieutenant told O'Malley that his work would be included in a larger report forwarded to corps-level staff. He said the Army was beginning to recognize the value of small-scale frontline innovation. O'Malley nodded. He had not done the work for recognition. He did it because he had watched too many men collapse from wounds that metal could have stopped. Weeks later, during a rare quiet night, O'Malley sat near the edge of the trench. The moon cast pale light across the ruined landscape. Crater rims glowed faintly. Distant flares rose and faded. The front felt still for the first time in days. Lewis sat beside him and rested his backplate on the ground. He examined the curved metal and traced the dents with 2 fingers. He said that without O'Malley's idea he would not be alive. O'Malley listened. He said little. He understood the truth but did not feel pride. He felt responsibility. Every plate he shaped had to be flawless because someone's life depended on it. He looked toward the horizon and felt the weight of the work he had done. In the months after the engagement, the company rotated out of the sector. New units arrived and noticed the presence of battered metal plates strapped to the chests of departing soldiers. Rumors spread along the line. Other blacksmiths, welders, and mechanically skilled men began shaping their own versions. The idea grew beyond one workshop. It became a small shift in thinking, a recognition that soldiers could create their own answers when official solutions did not exist. Corporal Thomas O'Malley left the front later that year due to shrapnel wounds to his leg during a separate engagement. His breastplate, dented almost beyond recognition, was removed during medical treatment and sent with him. It remained with him long after the war. He returned to his village, rebuilt his forge, and resumed blacksmith work. When neighbors asked about the battered iron plate hanging on his wall, he explained that it was not a trophy. It was a reminder that in war survival depended on initiative. Many years later, historians reviewing frontline accounts noted that while O'Malley's improvised breastplate never became official equipment, it influenced early discussions about personal body armor in modern warfare. Its legacy lived in the simple fact that dozens of men survived fragmentation that would have killed them without it.